morning. So, before we spend the next 15 minutes together talking about transparency and our vision for transparency at SGS, let me quickly introduce the company. So with 88,000 employees all around the world, 1,800 offices and laboratories, we're well positioned in order to cover the wide of the food supply chain. We are in 150 countries, and we have been established, it's not on my slide, but just 2 years after the Musgrave Group in 1978. So you're within very, very good hands here. The challenge, there is nothing new here. The globalization of the food chain, that is nothing new. The increasing numbers of food scandals, and whether they're increasing or whether there is a perception that they're increasing is debatable. I'll just give you an example. I was here on Tuesday. I was watching my phone and here in Berlin, and I learned that Whole Foods in the US had a recall. Fortunately, nothing bad happened. No one was ill. But the reality is that being here, having nothing to do with the US, not looking at specialized magazine, just a general news outlet, I was made aware that there is a recall. And it's increasing, which gives the perception to the public that somehow there is a problem. And there is an increasing demand for authenticity. And I'm going to play a short video. It's a 3-minute video. The person who talks is an American professor. And I think the video is very interesting because you see the professor, but at the same time you see the consumer. So can we just play the video?
In 2006, we started seeing all the recalls for dog foods. What I realized is that one small ingredient can make a huge difference. And if it can do this to animals, what about people? One small ingredient when we're not paying attention. Lo and behold, I started running into products that were people food that had been recalled. And as I'm doing this research, I'm finding a number of very disturbing things. One is that there's no transparency in the system. The laws basically say that the traceability of the system is only one step ahead and one step behind. So the manufacturer had no idea that he was even getting products from overseas. We need to have transparency and traceability in our supply chains. As a customer, I have a right to know where my food comes from. And I'm not talking about where it was made. It could be made in the United States, but the ingredients are sourced someplace else. Most foods common foods that are processed foods, from what I can see, have some ingredients from China. And in fact, there's no question that the pollution in China is beyond anything that we've ever seen in the United States. And so we're getting a series of heavy metals, we're getting unknown toxins from chemicals that cannot even be remediated. And I use China because of the magnitude and the rapidity of change in China as an example. But it's true of emerging market countries where this is also true. So when you go back to the supply chain issue, what you have are long supply chains. There are so many intermediaries in the process. And if we want good, wholesome food, the soil, the air, and the water better be clean. We are looking at new business models that incorporate the sustainability and the social responsibility into the supply chain and what that means for companies and how companies can actually begin to do these things. So we want to have solutions, and part of it will be part of this solution, which is the traceability, I'm convinced, just the traceability of the government, which is say, you have to know where your food comes from the ground up. And that would be an amazing step forward.
Good. So what's in my mind is interesting. There is nothing new here for this audience, but these perceptions is going through the public. And it's just a question of time before the general public will start making the same reflection than these professor university. Now, from a financial point of view and trying to understand the cost and the lack of transparency, because there is no transparency, there is more fraud. Obviously, more transparency, less fraud. We're never going to avoid 100% of the fraud, but we can decrease it. So looking at the Grocery Manufacturer Association 2014, they made some study and gave some numbers where they said that fraud cost the global food industry between 10 and 15 billion per year, affecting about 10% of all commercially sold food. Quite a lot. And the fraud cost food business in terms of lost sales between 2% and 15% of annual revenue. So if we consider just the 2% to be conservative, it's still a lot of money. Now, a different way to look at the same problem and with a lack of transparency. I looked at a study that was done by Accenture, and they studied 62 announcements of disruption of food supply chain, whether it's a recall, whether it's any kind of scandals. And what they looked is that in average, the share price dropped by 7% and takes months and months to recover. And obviously, because we don't have this transparency, it's very, very difficult for us to predict. It can happen at any time. At any time, any morning, any big brand, any retailer could be impacted by such a thing. If we just think about the last one we talked about, and I think it was in the United States, seller restaurants selling sandwiches. If you look at the share price, it went down by 33% because of what happened. And most of the analysts consider that in terms of a business, it's going to take them at least a year to recover. So that is really, really a big problem. Now, if we try to look at the industry response, we had a multi-pronged approach. Many things were done in order to improve the quality of the food, and whether it's gap audit, third-party audit, and obviously at SGS, we're very much involved into that. We've got probably in excess of 4,000 auditors going all around the place. Auditing factory is 150 countries in how many different languages. We've got that understanding of the different problems, whether it's China, problems are completely different in China that they can be in the United States, obviously, and in any other small country. But really what's missing is what we don't know, and that's the lack of transparency. And the way we call it is the visibility layer. Most of you have a fairly good understanding of what's going on for your tier 1 suppliers, because you've got regular business relation. They are in your ERP system. They've been required to have some certification. You kind of understand what's going on. But when we go further down the chain, maybe tier 2, we still have a bit of information, but going to tier 3, 4, 5, it's a kind of a black box. And a different way to look at it is what I call the helicopter view. The reality is that we don't look at it that way very often because we don't know. Just because of the lack of the transparency, that's your typical food chain. And somewhere you may have one player which is unsafe or which is not respecting the child labor law. But you don't know because you just don't know that this participant is in your supply chain. The reality is that the strength of your supply chain is, as good as its weakest link. It's kind of a used saying, but that's the reality. So really the challenge is that there will be a point where those things will be discovered, and I think it's our role, together with the industry and SGS, to find a way to discover the problem before they surface, because the consequences can be really bad, whether it's for the brand recognition, whether it's for shareholders' value, whether it's for the CEOs of the world that are not sleeping at night because suddenly something really bad can happen and it could kind of derail the business of the company. So, moving to the solution, we do see three major technology trends that will change the possibilities. And very often during the conference, I heard people say, yeah, technology is not going to solve the problem. I think we all agree. But without technology, we're not going to solve the problem either. So we need both. We need the technology. And those trends are the big data. Everyone is talking about it. I'm still personally not having an IT background. I'm still a bit unclear about what big data is, but I'll try to explain my understanding of the big data in the next slide. Smart sensors, I'm not going to talk too much about those ones. We're not ready yet, but that's something we're looking at SGS. And the virtual communities, which can be are very, very powerful. And we've got several examples of virtual communities and how they have changed the way we looked at different things. Big data, after 2 years working with our technological partner, that's really all what I could understand. So you may believe I'm not very good at it. But we moved to the SQL database, which are the traditional database. Our Oracle system at SGS works on Oracle. And every time I'm trying to understand what kind of business I do with one of the big companies all around the world, and I launch a request, it takes me a good 15 minutes if I'm lucky, and finally I can, kind of understand the business I do with those companies. When I go on Google or Facebook or LinkedIn, I do the same research, and the reality is that it takes me a fraction of a second. So we're moving to the graph database, and again, that's really all what I can tell you, because then it's becoming too technical for me, but there is a change in technology that really makes the system, especially the social network system, far more efficient. What we want to do to crack the problem of the transparency is to create the first B2B transparency social network. And I'm just going to make a parallel, if you allow me, with LinkedIn, because I think LinkedIn is in a way, even though it's different, a good comparison. If you remember, 8 years ago, maybe, it depends if you're coming from the United States or from Europe or from Switzerland, where we are a bit slower to react in general. You received an invite. You probably create a profile. At that time, you had no resume, you had no picture, you had nothing. Then the network started to grow, and then you decided to put your resume, and then you put a picture. And I would bet that out of the audience in this room, probably 99% of the people do have a fairly accurate, updated LinkedIn profile. The only thing which may not be completely accurate is the picture, because we tend to all show a picture where we are 5 to 10 years younger, depending on where we stand in life. So it took some time, but that's really how it started. Now, if we try to understand how it disrupted the human capital industry, so to speak, and a very, very quick example, in my previous life when I was struggling to find a lab manager in the United States, North Carolina, to be accurate, and it was back 7 or 8 years ago before really LinkedIn became what it is today, I had to go through, because of the lack of transparency, that's really what it was, I had to go through a headhunter who, was called himself a headhunter, but the reality, the only thing he had is a small network of lab manager. And it was costing me 3 to 6 months' salary. That business is over, because today there is transparency. You find the good people, the good company are having access to a transparent market, and they're fighting to find the good candidates. So if we take LinkedIn as an example, I think we can certainly achieve the same kind of things with transparency and in a B2B. What we do need is a technical solution. We have it. It's today up and running, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. We need data accuracy. Everyone said, bad data in, bad data out, not to say something different. So that's where a company like SGS can play certainly a big role. because, again, we're all around the world. We are setting them onboarding. We've got team, local languages. If it's about trying to onboard the fishermen in Vietnam, as an example, we've got a team in Vietnam. We've got the food expertise, and we're well placed to push to onboard and to provide services to this community. The way it works really is everyone is having a private workspace. You can load your data. You can do it manually if you are my small fisherman in Vietnam, or you may have SGS doing for you in case you cannot do it because you haven't got access to this technology. If you're a big company, we've got all the API, but again, I'm not going to go too much into the technology. Data accuracy, one thing that we already have, and it's working. I mean, there is a window to our SGS certificate depository, and if you are authorized and if you want to do it, of course, you can access the platform, you can link with our SGS database, and it's going to guarantee that the certification information is accurate because it's coming from our audit database. We're talking with other players because we realize that cannot just be an SGS solution in a way, because the vision is one day or another having the possibility to have one place where you can find all that information with some link. We've been talking about interoperability quite a lot during those 3 days. But having one place is going to be something which is going to help quite a lot. So really, each company is the center of its own network. As Jerome explained, you can publish your information, you can be part of the network, you can invite your suppliers, you can make yourself visible as being a transparent company to generate additional business. In order to push or to incentivize the small suppliers, we're doing many different things. We're developing top-notch video training with another training partner, in order to give the possibility to get some training about food safety in general, in order to really give incentive to the small suppliers to participate to the network, and to push the transparency from the top with the help of the big brand retailers, but at the same time from the bottom, in order to onboard the small suppliers. Now, we're just at the beginning. We're not going to achieve transparency overnight. We've been talking about big data, everyone is excited, but before having big data, we need data. So the first step is the discovery. We started onboarding. We've got few pilots running today. We started onboarding a few suppliers. There will be resistance. Some people don't want to be transparent, but with the push, I think we can make it happen. Once you discover your supply chain, which is absolutely the first step, and I think it already brings value, just the discovery, just trying to understand what you have, we'll move to the next step, which is the analysis of what's there and a risk mitigation, trying to understand where are the possible problems. We'll be well placed to propose mitigation plan, whatever they are. They can be additional certification, they can be social audit, they can be removing a supplier from your supply chain because you don't want to have someone working for you. Plan implementation and performance monitoring and reporting, which will come in a later stage once we start having data in the database. So I want to thank you. It was my last slide, and before we move to a Q&A session, we're going to play another short video.